I'm Cody, and I am taking gender studies to get a better understanding of different genders and better understanding of cultures and cultures of oppression. My major is communications. I'm going to, in order to understand the framework of power and privilege and oppressions and culture that basically gets a lot of oppression, you need to understand the framework. So I'll be going over three frameworks, basically, which is the stratification, and then I'm going to be going over compulsory heterosexism because I find that very interesting. The first one, social stratification. In order to understand power and privilege, we need to understand the framework. Social structures tend to divide people into social categories. This many times is done by the following, basically done by labels, outgroups, and social mechanisms. A lot of these social mechanisms are enforced by laws, discrimination, and violence. Basically, a lot of this is done by institutions, by government, or even religious institutions. The second one is social class stratification. These have been reinforced by labor laws, anti-unions, and jobs being moved overseas. A lot of companies have moved jobs overseas because there's not a lot of the same labor laws that protect people in some of the states in the U.S., and so they can get away with working their employees over there harder and paying them less. A lot of the times that happens with China and even how Apple makes their iPhones a lot. This is reinforced each year by the separation of classes. So in the U.S., we definitely have a big separations of classes, and China has a huge separation of classes, which is really weird because they're a communist country and we're a capitalist country, so you would think it'd be a little different. But as far as classism, it's, very similar. This is reinforced each year basically because wealthy people are continuing to get massive tax breaks, while lower to middle class are forced to pay higher taxes each year, or even go into debt because they can't pay the taxes that year, which is just not, just ridiculous. The third one is gender stratification. This is upheld by the gender segregation in the workplace. This is also encouraged by the following below. Basically, gender segregation, traditional or other known as nuclear family, and gender discrimination. These are just the three different sects that are in the stratification under gender. And then basically under gender inequality, systematic gender inequality by hierarchical relationships are established through privilege and oppression through the social construction of gender. We have female, male, and trans. So what I mean by the social construction of gender is that it's basically made up. Sex is real, gender is socially made. So a lot of people identify as different genders, and a lot of how our society works is men and women are it's a very generalized social structure on basically everything. And it's just kind of how our society works. These rules are taught at a young age. Men and women are informed by cultural influences and power rather than their biology and psychology. You would think we'd want to go with the science first, but we kind of go with what the culture is doing. And then my last point here is compulsory heterosexism and homophobia. It's actually really interesting. Basically, by the definition of compulsory heterosexism refers to the idea that heterosexual, as a result, is a default sexual orientation. So when people think of basically sexual orientation, you think of heterosexualism. And that's kind of like the default of culture. You don't think of like maybe two women together or two men or vice versa. This is usually adopted as the norm before even knowing the person. So you automatically usually assume a person is so-called the cultural name is straight before you even meet them. And secular and religious institutions sometimes focus on narrow mindlessness of only cultivating to only heterosexuals. If so, this is automatically denies the LGBT lifestyle. If you're 18 and over in the U.S., Congress has enabled you to marry anyone of age and any gender. Basically, anyone that's 18 and over. It's your right. So these institutions, cater to heterosexism, but you have the right to marry anybody you fall in love with. That's just kind of what's going on. But yeah,
It's 1 o'clock.
thanks for looking at my video.